Welcome to Bamfordrose and another question of the week. In this week's question of the week, I've taken a comment from one of the posts on our YouTube channel, and it was from the video that we did a live inspection of the DB7. Now, we were quite critical of that car because it had a lot of things wrong with it to be critical with. And this is the thing with DB7s, you can either get really well looked after examples, and they're actually quite easygoing on the owner year on year because they've been well looked after, there's just servicing, keeping on top of a few maintenance jobs, and those DB7s are pretty good. There can be some basket cases out there that have just been neglected and are really troublesome to look after, fault after fault after fault. And when you've got the price of a DB9 not too far away from a DB7, and if it's a good DB9, then a DB9 is a lot better, easier to live with, and the driving dynamics are much better. And DB9 is still a timeless classic design. Even though the DB7 is, DB9 is just another evolution. It's all Ian Callum's work after all. Then, you know, is it really worth going after the DB7 compared to the DB9? And all I do is put those points out there so people can make their own mind up. So comments like Bruno raises here, where he says, I don't understand your point that you don't like DB7s. Well, probably in Switzerland, we have in general more well-maintained cars, probably. So I think I've already answered your point. Not that I don't like DB7s, it's just that I think you get a better car from a DB9 and only go for the DB7 if you really want those more classic looks that the DB7 offers. And I think you're right in that UK cars are pretty badly maintained and looked after. Obviously not cars that are serviced here, but the wider market, yes. Across the last 10 years, there's been 2 cars out of thousands that have come here that when they've been up on the ramp, you look underneath them, and these are cars that we've never worked on before, and you look underneath them, and when you look round them, you go, wow, whoever's been looking after this car has really cared for it. 2 in over 10 years and thousands of cars, that's it. One of those cars was from Germany. Now, this car had some really nice touches on it. When the coolant was changed, it had a little tag that was string tied around the top hose, got a little Aston Martin logo on it, got the date and mileage that the coolant had been changed, and consumables around the car had all these little tags on as well. It was super well prepared. You could tell whoever worked on that car, obviously it was a franchise dealer, just loved what they were doing, and they did a cracking job. Now, you never see any attention to detail like that from cars looked after in the UK. It must be a Germanic thing. I'd be interested to know if that was common practice on most premium cars, or maybe this is just one dealer that was caring for the car better than most people. It made me question, oh, you know, they're doing something that we're not. You know, do we need to go to that level? You know, because we care for these cars, the ultimate, and they're doing something that we don't. But then, you know, I think a tag like that is on the top hose to inform future people, let them know when a certain consumable was changed. If you come here, then you've got service sheets that have got different boxes ticked, and when the car comes back after a year or 2 years, we look at previous services so we know what's been changed. So, you know, why would you want to go anywhere else other than Bamfordrose for your service? So we don't have to stick a tag on to inform someone in the future. You know, so I thought that our service records were good enough. And I think as well as a really good level of service, then if someone takes their car into a garage in mainland Europe, somewhere, certainly Germany, Switzerland, you can see this happening, and they're told it needs X, Y and Z, then the owners will have X, Y and Z done. Where in this country it can be quite a struggle to convince people that they need new tyres when you can see the bead through the tread blocks, or they need new pads when they're worn down to the metal backing plate. and the little cutout slats in the disc have disappeared because the disc has gone well below its service limit. Oh no, I'm only going to do 2,000 miles this year. I can get by on the brakes or tyres as they are. I look on eBay and different sales portals around the world, especially in all parts of Europe and in the States, and you can see examples of cars that are cherished, and you just don't see to the same volume, the same numbers, that level of care in this country. Obviously you get lots of well-maintained cars, but you get a fair few sheds, and I don't think in other countries you get the volume of sheds that are out there in this country. So here's a few pictures, and this is in no particular order. They're all as bad as each other. Now this V8 came in and it's spent 10 years, not in the independent world, but in the generic world. It's been sold by premium sports car seller after sports car seller, and they've all stamped the service book with their stamp, saying that they've done a full service. But when you get the car on the ramp and have a look around, now for the first time in 10 years this car is a brand dedicated specialist, then it's quite a shock to the owner that those generic service stamps mean absolutely nothing. So here's the first picture, and that's the oil filter. You can see nicely corroding. Now apparently that had been changed 1 year ago, but looking at the level of corrosion that filter has, I'd put that older than 5 years. It's quite severe corrosion. So next picture there is of the lower suspension arm. That's the anti-roll bar drop link arm, and it's just an example of where at each annual service nothing has been sprayed with maintenance spray, greased and preserved for the future, and that anti-roll bar drop link arm has just been dying over the years of a lack of decent service regime. Now if you come to do any maintenance work on that suspension system and you need to take that anti-roll bar drop link arm off the roll bar, you can see that that nut, that fixing, everything is just gonna it's seized up, and as soon as you touch it you'll need a new one. Next picture shows the exhaust system. Now this is common to see on cars with this level of corrosion. That exhaust heat shielding you can see there above the catalyst is just flapping around. So often someone will come in and say there's a bit of a rattling or a bit of noise when you go over bumps, and it's that heat shield just banging on the catalysts because all the mounting points of that heat shield are broken. Next picture is of the center clamp there of the exhaust system, and again because there's been no maintenance spray, nothing has ever been applied to preserve this car. If you need to take the exhaust system off to do a clutch, then every single clamp, every single fixing on that exhaust system is just going to shear off. Next picture down is the exhaust manifold to catalyst flange, just showing that, you know, you take one look at that and you realize that nothing is going to undo. Another component which should be greased and preserved, and this occurs every year, the brake soft line. So we've got the red caliper on the right hand side of the picture there, and we've got the soft line coming out of the caliper leading to the hard line bracket on the frame there, and you can see at both ends the metal joints of that soft line are completely corroded. And we had one car recently where they were corroded to the extent this was, and during the bleed process, obviously putting quite a bit of pressure through the system, more than what you would normally do at drive-in, and it actually ruptured one of these lines with that increased pressure that we would maintain during the bleeding process. You know, there's pretty bad corrosion. Yes, it's a fault of service because they should have been sprayed and protected, but also it's a failing of the treatment that component didn't have when it was produced, because if there was adequate covering to it like most of the soft line has got, then the exposed bits of the hard line wouldn't corrode like that. Now another common problem, as you can see here, is where a lot of customers will say, okay, well you're servicing my car this year, I had brake fluid change last year. Do I really need the brake fluid? Well, you don't. The hydroscopic effect of the brake fluid won't really start to cause any detriment until many years, probably plus 3 years really. And it is probably unnecessary to do a brake fluid bleed. But what you are doing at each service when you do a brake fluid bleed is you're undoing both the inner and outer caliper bleed nipples. That means that each year, if they were suffering any corrosion, then the fixing is eased out and then tightened back up again. As you can see from this picture, that bleed nipple hasn't been touched in years. The moment someone does try and touch it, it's going to shear off in the caliper, and then you've got to either engineer that fixing out cleanly, or if you can't, then it would be a new caliper that's needed. So an annual brake fluid bleed is a good idea to keep all the fixings moving rather than them seizing up and then causing you a bigger problem to resolve, which would be a new caliper. Next picture is the rear subframe, and as you can see there, brackets that are holding the lower wishbone arm in are looking pretty seriously corroded. I mean, that is at the point where we would be advising a subframe restoration rather than the corrosion just being surface and not really an issue. You know, that level of corrosion is starting to eat into the weld joints, and when you strip the car of the subframe and all of the suspension components, you can quite easily and worryingly break off some of these brackets. Now again, this isn't really a problem of service, because greasing and maintaining the subframe and maintenance spray isn't really a service action. This is a failing of the car from production. There is no way that a car of this age, 10, 15-year-olds, should be corroding its subframe to that extent, meaning that it needs a refurb. I always commented to people at Gaydon when I was working there that, I saw these Astons through day one of prototype through to production release for this generation Gaydon 1 era car. And that site, in the bad old days, used to belong to British Leyland. Now, as bad as that company was for quality, there was actually some really good facilities on that site. And one of the facilities is corrosion development, and there were salt baths where cars would spend months in a locked sealed chamber that had a quite nasty mix of salt and humid air, and then they'd be taken out and stripped down and examined how they withstood that sort of rapid aging corrosion process. Now, for the years that I was at Aston, I never saw any one of the cars go in a bath like that. Yet that facility was there. It was part of Ford, part of Jag Land Rover, so it was easy for Aston to access. Now, 20 years later, you can see all the steel components that I was worried about and now actually quite significantly corroded. It's quite a shame to see. That subframe should have not just had the wafer thin paint coating on that it has from production. Really, that should have been galvanized, zinc plated powder coat, and it should have lasted the life of the car, really. Next two pictures are under tray fixings. Now, this is the plastic rear tray, and you can see from these fixings that they've not been off in years. Now, this car has been so-called serviced in the completely generic world for the last 10 years, so I doubt that rear tray has been off in 10 years. That means its diff oil, gearbox oil has never been changed, and the whole rear end of the car has not properly been inspected, because you need to take that rear cover off to inspect the car properly. Now, absolutely none of those fixings are coming out. They need the heads grinding off them and then drilled out, and then if the drilling process was precision clean enough, maybe you just run a tap up the thread, or if not, you have to re-engineer the thread. Now, front tray, rear tray, wheel arch liner fixings, if they're all like this, then that is an incredible amount of time that a professional workshop is spending to recover fixings. This is the equivalent of a dentist complaining about removing plaque. It's a job that a professional workshop shouldn't have to do, and they're only having to do it because prior servicing standards have been so poor that it's allowed the the fixings to corrode to this level. So the moment you put a car up in the air and you have a look at the condition of those under tray fixings, you can instantly gauge that the service is either good because the fixings are clean and fresh, or if they look like this, then the car really hasn't been serviced for years. Next picture is another angle of the rear frame, just showing how badly corroded it is everywhere. Next picture is the handbrake cable. Well, obviously that hasn't been greased in decades. The handbrake assembly is another commonly skipped item at service. You know, when a car comes in for service, if the handbrake cable is clicking, you know, your 3 to 6 clicks, then they'll leave it alone. You know, why touch something that appears to be working? But that's not what a service is about. At service, whether it is 3 to 6 clicks, you need to back the assembly off, wind it out the piston, grease the cable, readjust it all, and then you know the handbrake mechanism is completely serviceable. Next picture isn't just showing a badly corroded brake soft line, but we've got the wear lead indicator for the pads cable tied to the wishbone arm. Another telltale sign that the car hasn't been worked on by someone brand dedicated. You know, we just saw all those under tray fixings that the car needs, and any independent workshop is just going to have lin bins full of these fixings. The amount of cars that I see coming here for the first time where there's completely generic fixings used on the under trays, generic fixings used on the wheel arch liners, and then instead of the proper fir tree connectors, they're just cable tying brake wear leads to the wishbone arm. Now, okay, it's not crime of the century and the lead is held out of the way, but it's just not factory, and you know if the car has had that done to it, together with the fixings being completely seized in place, you just know straight away that this is a car that hasn't really been loved. And we're back to our oil filter that looks like it's been raised out of the Titanic. So yes, Bruno, I'd have to agree with you. You probably, outside of this country, the cars are in much better condition because they get whatever they need. Running cars into the ground, paying as little as possible for service, just... Is it isolated to this country? We know, because we've mentioned before, that in those early Gen 1 Gaydon era days, sales were 30% UK, 30% Germany, 30% the States, 10% the rest of the world. So in those markets where there are big clusters of Astons, do you see cars like the pictures that I've just shown you? Do owners skip essential works? Is it just a UK thing that cars are in this sort of condition? Give us your comments, but don't comment saying, I'm destroying your dream, because what we're doing is making people informed so they put a dream on their driveway and not have a nightmare. Click us a like, subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you on the next question of the week.